Hi there, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. Glad to have you here. I'm Maryse Williams. I'm the founder of JobMorph. And tonight I'm going to do a group coaching session. We do 2 group coaching sessions a week at JobMorph. And this is one of the 12 topics that we cover. You know, this is just our typical group coaching. So for those of you who are JobMorph clients, welcome. And if you're visiting, then let me know and say hello. So hi, everybody. I think the chat is working, should be working fine. So let me see if I'm going to test it out here. Hi, everyone. So if you have a question, you can certainly put it in the chat. If you want to talk amongst yourselves, you can certainly do that. I am going to concentrate on the presentation, and then, towards the, from time to time, I'll take a look over at the chat and engage with that. But I'm just going to focus, make sense, right? I'm going to focus on the presentation today, and helping you with interview preparation is the goal today. So again, welcome everybody. If you're just joining in, I'm Maryse Williams. I'm the founder for JobMorph, and I started this company to help people who are out there looking for a job, particularly professionals. That's most of our clients are people with advanced degrees, bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, and PhDs and MDs and law degrees and all sorts of degrees, right? And so we're going to talk today about interview preparation, and that'll be the topic. And as I mentioned, this is one of the 12 group coaching sessions that I do for all our JobMorph clients. So when you're a client at JobMorph, you get 2 of these a week as part of the program. There's a whole lot of other things in it. If you want to check out JobMorph and learn more about it, here is the link. I'll put that in the chat for you. And great to have you here. We're going to get started on time, right? We're supposed to get started at 5:30, so I'm going to get started at 5:30, and let's get going, right? So there's essentially, right, 4 actions that you have to do consistently to achieve the goal that you want of finding this dream job, right? That's what my company is really all about. And there's really 4 things that you got to do pretty consistently. It's applying, it's building your network, it's improving your interview skills, and of course, it's keeping your motivation up. So I try to focus on those 4 things every single week when I meet with the clients in group coaching, just to kind of remind everybody what activities really do work to achieve results. And it's sort of like a way to have a little mental, check-in, right? Am I applying? Am I building my network? Am I improving my interview skills? And am I staying motivated in this process? So it's kind of a way to sort of remind ourselves, what do we got to do? And almost everything that I cover with my clients, I really try to stress to you that there's certain key ideas behind all of this. And one of them is that this is a competitive event. Interviewing is really a highly competitive event. And the best person at articulating their fit for the job, and that articulation happens verbally in the interview, but it's also those documents that you prepared in advance, right? The resume, the cover letter, the LinkedIn profile, the job application. So the person who's best at articulating their fit for the job, and the person who's best at building rapport with the hiring manager and higher ups is likely to get the job. And so it really is all about, understanding that there's this recruiter that's a gatekeeper to the hiring manager and the higher ups. And that recruiter has more of a binary approach, more conservative in their thinking. And so you can't ever be unprepared for these interviews. I mean, think of it this way. The interviews, when you get into an interview, you're the closest that you can be toward getting a job, right? You've passed that initial phase and you're as close as you can get towards getting this job offer. And one of the things to keep in mind is with interviewing, cramming doesn't work. So sitting there running through questions the night before, the hour before, 3 days before, a week before, generally won't make somebody a better interviewer. It is a skill. Interviewing is a skill. And like any other skill, whether it's a language, whether it's golf, right? Whether it's baking, it's not something that you're going to get good at by just trying to cram all that knowledge into a short amount of time. You almost have to work on it on a regular basis in order to improve your skill set. And one of the last things that I always stress to all our clients is that when we're approaching this, we're approaching interviewing, we have to really believe that there's going to be someone more qualified than us that we're competing with. The idea that we're the most qualified applicant out there, it's kind of naive. And there are going to be internal candidates. Especially my clients tend to target companies that are really strong companies, really strong organizations, well-respected, treat their employees really well. So listen, if you're working at one of those companies, you're going to seek out internal promotions. You're going to want to stay, right? You're going to want to stay with the company. You're not going to want to jump ship. So we have to believe, right, that in this competition that we're in, and there's going to be at least four other people competing with us, right? So usually a pool of about 5 people. But listen, I've helped people prepare for interviews where the finalists were 14. So we don't know exactly how many finalists there are, but we know that there are finalists. Some of them are more qualified than we are. Some of them are internal candidates. We got to accept that we have to be prepared, that we can't cram. And there's really 3 people that we have to impress: the recruiter, the hiring manager, and the higher up. So there's really 3 different audience members that we have to, get on our side, so to speak. And that's one of the reasons why interview preparation is so key, because more than likely the reason you didn't get an offer had something to do with the interview. It's not, look, job offers come from interviews, whether you're entry level, whether you're mid-career, whether you're a senior executive. Job offers are a result of interviews. I really haven't heard of anyone getting a job offer without an interview, right? The interview is the critical step towards getting the job offer. So that's why we want to spend as much time as we can on interviewing. It is the most impactful. And so when I talk about practice and I talk about preparation, the way I see it is that practicing interviewing is part of preparing for interview. Ongoing weekly practice. And it is important to start thinking about, what does interview practice look like? Is it reading a blog on what I should or shouldn't say? Is it watching a video? Is it going to this event that right tonight? Is it reading a book? Is it reading a post? No, that's not really practice. That may be increasing your knowledge. And there's value to increase your knowledge, but you can't really think that that's practice. And writing out your answers or saying them out loud to yourself, kind of like rehearsing it in your mind, or even verbally as you're driving or doing some other things, that's not really practice. Practice is something that makes you better at something. And most people aren't going to get better by reading blogs or watching videos or writing out answers or saying them out loud. Now, one way that you can mimic interviewing is through networking conversations. In some ways, networking conversations are the best simulation of interviews. You want to become really good at talking about yourself professionally with a peer or somebody higher up in your field. The closest thing to that is going to be a networking conversation, right? Because you're going to have to tell the person about yourself. They might even ask that question. You're going to have to walk them through your background a little bit. You're going to have to share a little bit about your accomplishments with them. They're probably going to share a little bit about their accomplishments. There's going to be this conversation, this style, this collegial type conversation that is very common in interviews with hiring managers and in interviewings with higher ups. Most hiring managers and higher ups do a more informal way of interviewing. They like to get to know the person. They share stories about what they're working on. They ask for you to share stories about things you're working on, just like networking, just like going out there networking. So networking is really the closest simulation of an interview that you can have. But it's also important because we talked a little bit about how when you interview, the gatekeeper is the recruiter. So we also need to, practicing through networking is not going to be enough. We need to practice with a former recruiter. And usually in about 6 to 8 weeks of time, most people can become proficient in getting past the recruiter to the hiring manager. I mean, I look at this stuff really closely. So we have a recruiter that practices each week with our clients. His name is Tony, actually. And I can see that people come into JobMorph, and without Tony, they were getting interviews, moved off to the next round of interviews about 20% of the time. Once they started practicing with Tony, and they completed like about 6 to 8 weeks of practice with him, then they were getting moved forward about 80% of the time. And that makes a really big difference, right? If for every recruiting conversation you have an 80% chance of moving forward, it increases the number of interviews you're going to have with the hiring managers, and it increases the chance that you'll get multiple offers, right? It increases the chance that you'll be able to negotiate the offer better. Multiple offers usually means that. This is especially important for mid-career and senior level job seekers. Mid-career and senior level job seekers sometimes struggle with the recruiter interview because it may be the first time in a really long time that they're talking with somebody so junior about what they do. So you think about somebody who's a lawyer, was a law professor, this client I recently helped, right? Who's applying for jobs at prestigious law firms. But in order to get that interview with the hiring manager, he has to get past a recruiter. And that recruiter is not a lawyer. That recruiter is not that knowledgeable about his area of specialty within law. That recruiter is at just a different level professionally than he is. And yet he has to be able to talk to that recruiter, male or female, right? Or non-binary, right? He has to talk to that recruiter and be able to help that recruiter understand that he is the right fit for the job. So that recruiter moves him forward. If he can't do that, if he struggles to talk to people who are really junior than he is about his talents and expertise, if all he can do is have conversations with people at his own level or slightly below, then he's probably going to have a hard time moving forward in this process. And it's going to hurt the chances of him getting a lot of, offers. And then, of course, that hurts the chances of negotiating. So it's very important for mid-career and senior level people who have expertise often in an area to practice talking to someone who's a recruiter. Now, I have to tell you something, that one big challenge of this whole enterprise of ours, right? This work that we're doing together of trying to get better at interviewing, right? Is that it's extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible, to get clear feedback from recruiters about your interview, from hiring managers and from higher ups. Most organizations tell the people who are doing hiring, do not give feedback on why you didn't select somebody. Do not do that. It's against our policy. So if somebody is giving you feedback, if somebody's pushing you aside and saying, let me tell you why you didn't make it through to the final round, they are most likely violating their company's policies. So you're taking the advice of someone who doesn't really follow the rules, just so you know. And their advice could be right on target, or it could be really off base. Because again, this is someone whose company has coached and advised and set policies against this behavior, but they're performing it. Companies do not want their employees giving feedback because it's unfair. Unless they give feedback equally to everyone, then it's not fair. Right? Because sometimes, and there's plenty of lawsuits about this where companies have had to pay out significant dollars. Sometimes these employees give feedback that could be a grounds for a discrimination lawsuit, a successful discrimination lawsuit. So that's why they don't want their employees giving feedback to candidates about their performance. So how can, when you're trying to get better at something and you have no feedback, right? You can see how that's sort of like a recipe for never getting better, right? And especially if the only feedback you have is that you got the job or you didn't get the job. And we all know that sometimes you didn't get the job, not because you didn't do such a good interview, but there were other factors involved. So you need to practice with someone who's a recruiter who's giving you actual feedback about your performance. And that's what we do with JobMorph, right? Is we have Tony. Tony works for JobMorph. Tony was a recruiter for many years, and he can say to you, "Hey, that didn't sound so good. Or, hey, there's another way that that could be read, that sentence that you're saying. And it's not flattering actually for you. So it's a way of getting feedback. Now, another part of practice, right? Another part of it is knowing what the best answers are, because there are awful answers, there are good answers, and there are extraordinary answers to interview questions. And we want to land on the extraordinary end, right? Every single time. You know, when somebody asks us, tell me about yourself, we want to give a top-notch answer. When somebody asks us, do you have any questions? We want to give a top-notch answer. When somebody says, tell me about an example where there was a conflict between you and a colleague, we want a top-notch answer, right? Because we know that this is a highly competitive event, and we're competing against people who are more talented, more experienced, more everything than us, and internal candidates. And so we've got to perform really well. If we perform just good, we're not going to get the offer. And if we perform awful, we're definitely not going to get the offer. And so the weekly group coaching that I do is a lot about giving you the top-notch answers. So I have like a session that's just on basic interviewing questions, behavioral interview questions, difficult interview questions, right? It's about learning what makes something a good answer, what makes it an awful answer, and what makes it a top-notch answer. Top-notch answer. How will it affect the decision makers, the audience? A lot of that is about knowing the audience, right? Understanding how higher ups think, understanding how the hiring manager is thinking, and understanding how the recruiter is thinking. And you know what? There are three different audiences. They're not necessarily thinking exactly the same way. So we have to kind of be clued in on that. So there's 4 components to this idea of interview practice, right? I got to know the best answer. For us at JobMorph, that's through group coaching. I should practice as much as I can. And we have an AI platform that allows you to practice 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as much as you want, really. No limit on practicing, so that you can continuously improve your interview skills and get feedback, you know, tons and tons of feedback. Then we have this recruiter practice that I mentioned with Tony. And then, as I talked about earlier, networking is a very effective way to simulate interviews. You know, and you can network with your contacts, right? Or you can network with contacts from JobMorph. But the key of the whole thing is that these are the 4 components of what we call interview practice, right? That's what we're trying to do. Now, preparation, and like, remember I said, practice is a part of preparation. So what is preparation? Preparation is like you have an interview coming up. Well, what do I do? What's the checklist that I go through in order to be prepared for that interview that's coming up? Can't practice, right? Because that's not enough time. That would be cramming. I'm practicing every single week, but now I have an interview coming up, and now I'm preparing for that interview. And what does preparing mean? Well, it means going through and looking at the resume, the cover letter, and the posting, and reading them really carefully. You know, like the way you might read a college textbook for an exam that's worth 80% of your final grade. You know, you'd grab that highlighter, you'd grab that pen, you'd grab those notes, you'd read it more than one time, right? You would almost have memorized that information, right? If you knew that this exam is 80% of your final grade and you need this course in order to graduate. So that's the kind of preparation that needs to go into reviewing the resume, the cover letter, and the posting. I don't know how many times I hear this, but most people, maybe you up until this point, really do not save the resume, the cover letter, and the posting and walk into this interview without basic preparation. This is your chance to beat them out. That's what most people are doing, right? They don't have the resume that they sent. They don't have the cover letter that they sent. They don't have the posting for the job. And yet they're going to walk into this interview. It's so foolish, but it gives you an advantage if you just don't act like they do. Now, the second thing I want to tell you is that a lot of people, you know, they're looking for jobs and they see a phone and they just rings, they pick it up. Don't really ever do that when you're searching for a job. Look, if you want to be prepared to take this call, you don't want to be on your way into your car where there's noise in the background, where you don't have good cell reception. The reality is that's going to affect your performance. where you're not even in the right mental state, where you haven't had time to review your resume, your cover letter, and the posting, right? You're not going to be able to perform top notch. So always let your phone go to voicemail. You'll call them back when you're fully prepared, right? That's when you'll call them back. You don't want to do an interview on the fly. I talk to recruiters a lot, and recruiters tell me that almost every day someone says this to them. Yeah, it's a terrible, I really can't hear you. There's a lot of noise, but let's go on with the interview. Almost every day somebody says that to them. And it will affect, if you can't really hear them, they can't really hear you, how can that not hurt you? If you're in a spot where there's so much noise that you're distracted, how can that not hurt you? If you haven't given yourself a chance to review this posting before you talk to them, how can that not hurt you? Now, key to preparation is doing some company research. Today, if you haven't researched the company that is on the phone with you or on the Zoom with you or on the Teams with you, I got to tell you, you look really, really bad because information is easily accessible today. So a failure to gather it, well, it looks lazy, it looks uninterested, and honestly, it looks unprofessional. You got to think about it. We're looking for people, if we're hiring on the executive level, senior positions, we're looking with people of executive presence. Executives don't walk into meetings unprepared. Executives don't forget to look things up before they get into a situation, especially where they can. So if you're somebody senior looking to get a senior role and you're not doing these things, you really look incredibly bad. But it also affects mid-career and it also affects entry level. So company research. Industry research is a little different. Like, think about it this way. You're somebody who has a finance background. You just applied for a job at an aeronautical company. You should know a little bit about the aeronautical industry. I'm not saying that you want to pretend that you're an expert in aeronautics. Maybe you're not. Maybe this is the first company you've ever applied to that has anything to do with aeronautics. But you shouldn't look like somebody who didn't even bother to read one or two short articles on the aeronautical field. I mean, you're interviewing for a company that's in the aeronautics field. You should know something about it. So remember, preparation, it's like got these 4 components to be successful. This is almost like your little checklist before the interview. Now, part of this little checklist is, do I have clear in my mind my greatest accomplishments, the things I'm most proud of about my career? And am I prepared to tell those stories in an interview? This is some of the pre-work that goes into interviewing, right? That's why this whole idea of cramming would not work, because it might take some time for you to really think through, what are those greatest accomplishments? Maybe there's 17 of them and you have to choose which 6 or 7 you want to really focus on. Maybe it's going to take you some time to kind of craft how you'll tell that story. We don't want so many details, but we don't want so few details that no one can understand why the result is so impactful, right? We have to know. Think of it this way. If you don't know what are the 5 or 6 or 7 greatest things that you've accomplished, then how would you know if you shared them in the interview? And if you can't tell whether you shared them in the interview because you don't even know what they are, how can you leave the best impression in these interviews, right? This is something you have to know, so that like in the interview, you're almost like, okay, well, I shared that, didn't share this story, let me get this story in. But that requires you doing a little bit of analysis on, what are my greatest accomplishments? What are the things I'm most proud of? What are the things that I got promoted for, I got a raise for, I got a bonus for? What does that list look like? And how do I craft those stories in a way that I'm ready to prepare to tell them? I want you to think about it for a second, that most people, again, aren't doing this. So when they get in an interview and somebody says, tell me about a time when you showed leadership, they like literally, you can see them thinking it. Let me think of that. Let me think of that. Oh, yesterday, let me tell that story from yesterday. Because that's how our memories work, right? Recency is what we're going to tell. Something happened yesterday, the day before yesterday, 3 days before that. But maybe the best story of that person's leadership, the best example of that leadership that that person has is actually something that happened 32 months ago. And that's really one of the most impressive things that they've ever done in their career. They might not even remember to tell it. But you, because you have prepared, you have developed your list of your great accomplishments, and then you're ready to tell the story. And let's think about this for a second. If I have stories to tell about my 7, let's just say, great accomplishments, more than likely in each of these stories, there's a little bit of leadership, right? More than likely in each of these stories, there was some sort of conflict. Usually is. More than likely in each of these stories, or in many of these stories, there's short deadlines or a lot of pressure or limited resources. Right? There usually is. So in a way, I don't have to prepare a million questions. I can use these 7 stories to answer many of the questions that are going to come up in the interview. And look through it, I'm sort of ticking off, okay, I told the 5, I got 2 more stories to tell that would be good. And you know what? I could always tell the same story twice, slanting in a different way. The first time I told you the story, I kind of focused on, the challenges of resources in the task. And the next time I told the story, I kind of delved more into the conflicts that were in the team, the conflicts with management, the conflicts with leadership, right? The conflicts with customers, those kinds of things that were going on as well in that same accomplishment. Because there usually is a lot of stuff going on with these great accomplishments. Now, part of preparing really for interviews is connecting with former and current employees. These are the people who know what it takes to get an interview, to turn an interview into an offer at that company. I mean, they know it. They just went through that process. They know what interviewing is like. They've been interviewed. They know what's appealing and what's not. And also, in addition to giving you tips and insights, they often can act as an advocate if they take a liking to you. I've seen that happen over and over again. I do a whole presentation on building relationships with people who are, former and current employees of companies. And that whole presentation has yielded over the years many, many, many stories of people becoming advocates for someone, a perfect stranger becoming really engaged and involved in helping that person get a job. So that is part of preparing for an interview, right? And I want you to think about it is that there's this whole process. We apply for jobs, right? Then we get the interview. When we're at the interview phase, we're as close as we can get to the offer phase, right? That's the closest we can get. So we want to invest more time in the interview than really anything else. I tell people all the time that if you have an interview scheduled, that's your number 1 priority. So connect with former and current employees because that's going to help you in the interview. Make sure you have a solid answer to tell me about yourself. We know they're going to ask you that question. Walk me through your resume. Tell me about yourself. Tell me what I need to know. However they might phrase it, they want you to share 2, 3, 4 sentences about you and who you are. And you need to have this completed. You can't be figuring this out in the interview, trying different things in different interviews, or you want to do this in a way that's so strong that after you finish it, you feel like yourself, I really nailed that. Because it's going to give you confidence for the rest of the interview. It's going to make the rest of the interview go really well. So part of preparing, right, is that I have my greatest accomplishments down. I have my connections. I have my tell me about yourself. And I've come prepared with some smart questions to ask. Look, this is your chance to impress. You're only going to get so many opportunities in an interview to really impress people. It's only so many minutes long. Don't waste a single one of them. So somebody asks you if you have any questions, don't be grabbing some questions from Google and asking those, the same questions that everybody's heard 1,000 times, maybe 10,000 times at this point. And certainly don't ask questions that are like the kinds of questions that are turnoffs for employers. And we kind of know which ones those are, the ones that are about salary and how many days do I get to work from home? And, do I have to buy the computer or do you provide it? Those kind of questions are like real turnoffs to almost all employers. they're going to share that information with you in due course. And if they offer you the job and they don't tell you all that, that's a good time to ask, is once they made the offer. But right now, we're in a phase where we're trying to impress them. So we take those questions that they say, do you have any questions? We take that as an opportunity where we can impress that interviewer, right? Because what we want to do is move forward to the next round. And then from there to the next round, and from there to the offer, right? That's what we want to do. And we also realize that this interview, this time in this interview, is determining how high of a salary they're going to offer us. Are they going to offer us the low end of the range? Are they going to offer us the mid end of the range? Are they going to offer us the highest end of the range? Are they going to blow that range and toss it out the window and create a new range just for us? That's what's being decided in the interview. So this work that we're doing, this effort that we're taking, this really does end up as dollars in our pocket, like actual compensation in our checking account. So it has a tremendous return on the investment. Okay, so this is about preparing. Highly competitive event, right? In any competition, we always seek ways to take an advantage. And because we know that these other people are not going to really prepare, and we know that they think practice is listening to videos on interviewing or watching blogs, or I said that wrong, reading blogs or watching videos, we're not going to do that. We're going to really take seriously that preparation is being ready for the interview, having all the pieces nailed. And practice is really practicing with a recruiter. It's practicing where they're giving us feedback. It's practicing through networking. So we get that rhythm of talking about ourselves. It's practicing through with AI, right? It's practicing by knowing what are good answers, what are mediocre answers, and what are like knock you out of the park kind of answers. That's what we're really good at. So that's what we talked about today, right? Is this idea of interviewing, the 4 components of practice and the 4 components of preparation. And it really does. I've seen this over and over again. It increases the chance of moving on to the next round once you adopt these ideas. Once you really kind of think to yourself, okay, for my job interview, I'm going to practice with recruiters, with networking, with a platform and group coaching. This is going to be my routine, and I'm going to keep getting better and better and better because I'm practicing every week. And so every week, just like if I was playing a sport, I would have practice weekly, right? Same idea. I wouldn't wait till I was in the finals, state finals. And you know what? Tomorrow's state finals. So I'm going to practice now. That's not how I would do it, right? None of us would approach it like that. We wouldn't tell our kids to do that, right? We wouldn't tell anybody to do that. Wait for 3 days before the big meeting and then start practicing. The big meet and then start practicing. No. Practice is something that's an ongoing effort that happens every week, and we start seeing ourselves improve. We see improvements week over week. We see improvements month over month. We start to see that we are getting better and better when somebody asks us, tell me about yourself, or when somebody asks us why we want to leave this company and take the company that we're with today, or somebody asks us what happened in our last job. We're getting better at answering those questions. We're strengthening every one of our answers, and we're really becoming quite impressive interviewers. And if you think that you can't be better at interviewing, you are just sorely wrong. Everyone can get better at interviewing. The reason most people aren't that great at interviewing is because interviewing is not something natural. Interviewing is not something that we do on a daily basis. Like if you really stop and think about it, how often do you talk to people about your greatest accomplishments? Not very often. You don't go into meetings and sit your team down and go, let me share with you some of my great accomplishments. You don't go out to dinner with friends and go, okay, let me tell you about my great accomplishments, right? Let me tell you about a time I showed leadership. You don't even really go home to your spouse, your significant other, and tell them stories about, let me tell you about a time when there was a lot of conflict. And even if you are telling some of these stories socially about some work stories, you're probably not telling them in a clear, succinct way. Oh yeah, I forgot one part of it. Let me tell you this. That's not what you want to be doing in an interview. So the idea here is that almost all of us in our regular lives really don't engage in much in what's required in interviews. The stuff that happens in interviews really happens only in interviews. So the only way to really get good at it is to practice. Practice, practice, practice. It's the only way. There's no shortcuts. It's not, you're not going to, if you're terrible at it at 21, you're not going to just get awesome at it at 42 just because this is your 7th time looking for a job. Practice is what's going to get you better at it. And I'll tell you something, frankly, because they're often, for most people, the interviews don't happen every single week. We have to practice even when we don't have interviews, right? Just like going back to that sports analogy, we have to practice even though we don't have a meet this week, right? We still have practice scheduled. Even though we're not playing this week, we still practicing this week. Same idea here. That's how people really improve. And everyone can improve. Everyone can become a better interviewer. It's just that a lot of times we don't really understand the components to become an better interview. And once we understand them, then we're like, oh, this makes perfect sense. Let me just do this. And you'll see yourself get better. It's just like that. And the preparation piece, remember, it's a part of it is like this document review. A part of it is research, right? You're researching the industry and the company, right? You're learning from the internet, but you're also learning about this company and this industry from these contacts that you've made with people who work there or used to work there. And you're setting up your environment, right? You're making sure that when this interview happens, it's in the best environment you can possibly have. Now, we talked a lot about, they call you and you let the phone go to voicemail. But when I talk about environment, I also want to make sure that I'm stressing to you that it's a little bit more than that. Our time is sort of running out at this point, so I can't really go into great detail, but I'm going to just say to you is that if this interview is on Zoom, we should be proficient in Zoom, right? We shouldn't be struggling with buttons and stuff, right? Our backgrounds should look professional. If we're interviewing for an executive job, we better look at an executive, not just in how we're dressed, not just in how we're sitting, but in the fact that we're using technology that shows that that you can hear us, that the acoustics are good, right? That there's no crappy noises in the background. The environment counts. Because today, when people are being interviewed, there's an assumption that some of your work will be engaged through Zoom or through Teams or through some other platform, that you'll meet with some clients that way, that you might meet with some higher ups that way, that you might meet with colleagues that way, that you might meet with customers that way or clients that way, right? So people are evaluating your ability to work in a remote environment. They really are, whether the job is remote or it's not remote. They're still evaluating that. So making sure that your environment, you're comfortable in your environment and your environment is tight, right, is critical for you getting this job, whether it's remote or not. Now, I bet you some of you are saying to me, but if it's remote, they're probably putting more emphasis on that. And you are so right. If this company is expecting you to work independently at your home to do this job, they are paying close attention to whether or not you can log on, you can deal with tech issues, what your background looks like, what the audio looks like, what the lighting looks like. I mean, as far as they're concerned, you knew this was an interview. This is you at your best on Zoom or you at your best on Teams. And so it's fair for them to sort of judge it as how you would perform at your best, working with their clients, working with higher ups. So the environment is part of preparation. And then preparing those answers that we know are going to come up in the interview. Like, look, there's common interview questions. You guys could make a list of them yourselves. Things you've heard people ask you over and over again. But if you wanted to, you could just Google common interview questions. You're going to get a whole list. Those common interview questions, you need to have answers. And I just want to be clear, I'm not asking you to prepare 100 answers, but I'm saying we know they're going to ask you, do you have any questions? We know they're going to ask you, tell me about yourself. We know they're going to ask you to tell them about a time when you showed leadership or a time when you dealt with a difficult customer. Some kind of behavioral interview question is going to be asked. It happens in almost all interviews. So that part should be something that we don't have to even think about in the interview. We got it all ready to go in that moment. And of course, there are things we can't prepare for, right? We can't know every question they're going to ask, right? We can't know if what we're interviewing for is exactly what's in this job posting. You know, there's probably lots of examples that you've had where you apply for one job and get interviewed for a totally different job, and you don't even have any information about what job you're actually interviewing for. People have that example many, many times. So we can't, there's so much that we cannot predict. But if we nail the things that we can predict, then there's room for that, right? We'll do our best in those situations. There are going to be some parts of this interview where we just have to do our best. But what we're trying to do is to limit those parts. So like, let's say for the sake of argument, 75% of the interview, you got it all together. You know, you are going to be a rock star at. And about 25%, we're going to have to roll with the punches and roll with it, you know, and more than likely, that's what's going to happen. Now, I always start exactly where we just went through with all my clients. I stress to them what I stress to you about how interviewing isn't something we do in real life, that there's nothing really natural about it. And that's why practice and preparation are so key. And how critical it is to invest lots of time into it, because it's about as close as you get to that job offer, right? And it's the thing that drives getting multiple offers. And that's ultimately what we all want, right? Is those multiple offers. And so that's where I usually start with, you know, all the clients that we have. The next step beyond that, right, is once you've got all this down, right, the next step beyond that is really the building relationships so that you increase the number of interviews you have, you know, that networking piece, and, you know, strengthening your resume, your cover letter, and all that so that you increase your chances for interviews, right? So that's like increasing the number of interviews. This is really about once you have the interview, well, what do you do so that you increase the chance of getting a job offer? You know, and I always say to people, like, focus here most of your time. If you're getting interviews, what you need to work on is converting those interviews into job offers. And that means better practice and better preparation. That's where the emphasis really needs to be. I know it's tempting to put the emphasis on a cover letter, but that's not where the issue is here, right? The issue here is the interviews have come. Now I've got to be better at converting an interview into an offer. And that's all about what I'm saying in the interview and what I'm doing before the interview, how the interview leads up. I hope this has been helpful. If you're you know, a client of JobMorph and you have questions, please email me. You have my email. You all do. Just send me your question in the email. If you're not a client of JobMorph, feel free to use LinkedIn and message me on LinkedIn. I will promise you I'll get to all the questions being asked on LinkedIn. You guys have a great night. And thank you so much for coming in and sort of taking a little experience of what the group coaching with me is like. I truly enjoy doing this. It's one of the reasons I still do it live for every single client. I love it. I mean, I love what I share, and I've got some really great feedback over the years about it. So hope it helps you, and see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.